Hi, Forest School families. Natasha here again with this third segment in our Welcome to Forest School series. And this time I'm going to talk about gear. So you might have heard the saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And to a certain extent, that's totally true. If you have the right clothes, you can be out comfortably in almost any weather, anytime. However, I wonder if the people who came up with that idea have ever met real children. Because for some reason, children seem to have opinions about what they'll wear. And you might have spent $200 on the top of the line, awesome, amazing, wonderful gear, and they refuse to wear it because they'd like to wear a sparkly princess shoe on one foot, and a Superman cape, and their favorite swimsuit, and a tutu. And you have to decide, is this the battle that is worth fighting today? So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about gear from a very realistic point of view. So there's a couple questions you're going to want to ask yourself when you're gearing your kids up for a day at Forest School. Our Forest School is not drop-off, so you're with your kids. If they are miserable because of their choices, you can leave. You don't have to stay. It's not like you're dropping them off for 6 hours with another adult in the woods and they have to make do with whatever choices they made. So this is actually a really great opportunity for them to have to live with the consequences of their decisions when the stakes are really low. So the first thing you want to think about is, how long are you going to be out for? So if you're going to be out for 2 hours, that's very different than if you're going to be out for 8 hours or you're on a camping trip. Two and a half hours is our normal Forest School period, so even when we're in session, it's not too long for kids who made poor choices to be cold and wet. We live in Washington. It's probably going to be cold and wet for at least some of our winter. How often? So if you're going to be going out 3 days in a row, you might not have enough time for your gear to dry. So you might want to get cheaper gear, but multiples of it, or you might want to invest in something cool like a boot dryer. Boot dryers are amazing. You also want to take into account the personality of your children. Which is the most important thing? Do you want to pick just one thing to fight about? Maybe it's wool socks. Wool socks are non-negotiable because everybody's happier when their feet are warm. But you let them wear the tutu and the swimsuit and the cape, and then you put some extra layers on top of that and you just roll with that. Totally an option. And you also want to think about your budget. You don't want to spend a ton of money on Forest School clothes because they're going to be playing in the mud and the dirt, and you want them to be doing that, but the clothes don't always last forever. So you really don't want to spend a ton of money. So I wanted to talk about the 5 models that I came up with when I was thinking about ways to buy gear for Forest School. So the first model is the REI model, and that was where I kind of started. Go to REI and buy the top of the line, most amazing stuff. Pretty nice. Still have a lot of my REI stuff from when I started teaching Forest School. It's pretty ratty now. I bought some tenacious tape for it, cover the holes. If I had it to do over again, I would have actually picked different gear. But since it's what I have, that makes a lot of sense for me to use it. It wouldn't make sense for me to buy new stuff just because what I have is not the ideal. It works well, it's breathable, it's lightweight, it's made for backpacking. I'll tell you a secret. Weight doesn't really matter a lot when you're doing Forest School. You're probably going to walk a mile, maybe a mile and a half if you're really ambitious, over 2 hours, maybe more. So the things that make gear expensive are lightweight and breathability. And if you're not exercising heavily and you're not walking really far and you're not carrying a lot of gear, those things actually don't matter too much, which brings us to our second 2 models. So next we have the Cabela's model, which is a lot like REI, but a little bit more durable. So people are buying stuff more for hunting and for fishing from Cabela's. It has a little bit more durability, but still on the pricier side. You can also go to farm supply stores. So farm supply, sometimes Army Surplus has rain gear. This is like the work gear. And if I were to do it over, this is actually where I would start. It tends to be a lot cheaper. It's pretty durable. It's actually waterproof. Most of the breathable fabrics eventually do lose their waterproofness and need to be resprayed. So super breathable, super waterproof and very durable. So that is a really great way to go, especially when you're buying gear for a whole family. There's also the thrift store approach. So if you have time and energy and you want to go to secondhand stores and buy whatever you find, that totally works. But you might find that, especially right now, it's hard to do that. So secondhand gear might be hard to find. And finally, there's the it'll do approach, where you go through your closet and you see what you've got. And you throw one kid in a poncho and you throw the other one in a jacket that's 3 sizes too big, and you just roll with whatever you've got, because once they're out there having fun, they actually won't care at all. So those are my 5 models of buying gear for Forest School. There's also one more choice, and that is just getting wet. So people who spend a lot of time outside sometimes realize that they actually don't really mind. They just get wet, and then after they're done getting wet, they get dry. and that might also be you. I do recommend for adults that you buy a pair of rain pants, because I found that when I was parenting a young child and wanting to be outside, when I wore my rain pants, I was way more likely to get down on the ground with them and to explore in a different way than if I was trying to keep my bottom dry. So I do think rain pants are a really, really nice thing to have. Some people have never heard of them if they've moved from elsewhere, but rain pants are maybe my favorite piece of outdoor gear. So if you're only going to buy a few things, I wanted to just go into some essentials and a few cheats. So wool socks are amazing. If the kid goes over their boots in the water, because there's a big puddle and it's super tempting, it'll happen, I promise. We call those boot buckets. Then if they have wool socks, you just pick up the boot, drain out the water, squeeze out the socks, and they're actually going to be warm for the rest of the day in those wool socks. So things like wool and polyester and fleece are all really good choices because they are still warm when they're wet. So consider those items when you're shopping. You also want to consider layers. So kids get too hot, then they get too cold. So instead of going with one big fuzzy layer that might be super appealing right now in the fall, you can go with wool-based layers, or one of my favorite cheats is fleece pajamas. So the fleece pajamas, Costco has their 32 degrees base layers in right now, and they're pretty inexpensive. So layers, then throw a fleece on top of that, and then throw a rain shell on top of that. Those are all good options. Hats and gloves. Hats are a great choice. A rain hat is fabulous because a lot of kids don't like the way their peripheral vision is impacted by a hood. So a rain hat really solves that problem. And gloves, I actually like the Magic Midi style. That a lot of kids get really frustrated at not being able to manipulate things in their fuzzy, fluffy, puffy gloves. So the ones that just slide onto their hands tend to work a lot better. But you might want more than one pair, because once they're cold and wet, they're not very fun. And if they take them off, they're really hard to get back on if they're wet. So more than one pair. Footwear, anything from hiking boots to rain boots to whatever they'll wear is really going to be fine. They might have wet feet, and that's really okay. My kid's preference was the uninsulated bogs. He found that the insulated ones were a little bit too stiff to do any good tree climbing or balancing it. So boots that they'll wear are better than the top of the line boots. When you are done, this is where it gets tricky, because now you might have 2 or 3 wet children full of wet gear, and you have to figure out how to transition back to the car. So some families have shared that they use a Rubbermaid tub. They have put the big Rubbermaid tub in the back of the vehicle. They shuck the children, put all the gear that's soaking wet into the tub, and then put the kids into car seats either in new clothes or in underwear and car blankets. I recommend car blankets. I really like them. If you have to go somewhere on the way home, car blankets may not be sufficient. You might want extra clothes, but that's something to think about. And then extra shoes as well, because chances are good their shoes will not be ones that a business is happy to have your child come in wearing. They will be wet and muddy. If you are bringing a preschooler or an infant, you are certainly welcome to do so all year long. We love our forest school babies so much. Some moms really found that the carriers were the best choice for an infant. So we had moms and dads carrying babies, front carries, back carries, and usually a soft structured carrier. That works really well. Some people use the frame pet carriers, which are nice because you can put the baby down when they have a nap. So those are another great option. They also have a good rain or sunshade option, so those can be really good. Once your child is mobile, they often prefer a stroller or a wagon ride to a carrier or walking, or a stroller and a carrier if they're like my children. So those can be a really great thing. We're going to use a chariot this year for the 4-year-old so that we can have a warm, dry place for her to be when she is done with our activities. So those are some things to consider if you are bringing toddlers. I always recommend snacks. Snacks make the world go round. If you are 10 or under, maybe older, I'm not sure. But snacks are always a great idea to bring. So consider some snacks. And the number one thing you're looking for is, are you going to be able to have fun? So adjust your gear accordingly so that you can have the most fun possible on that day. Thanks. That's the end of episode 3, Gear.